Hello and welcome to Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics, the podcast dedicated to reviewing each and every one of the so-called Walt Disney animated classics in chronological order and reviewing them on their own merits through a modern lens, putting aside our own nostalgia and the context in which they were released. My name's Ben, and joining me as always is my good friend Liam. Liam, which film have we got this time?
This week, Ben, we are taking a look at 2007's Meet the Robinsons, written and directed by Steven Anderson in his writing and directorial debut with Disney, though he's been with the company for quite a while at this point, and very, very loosely based on a 1990 children's book, A Day with Wilbur Robinson. So, Ben, to start us off, what's your background with this film? Because this feels like one that I imagine you didn't watch when it came out.
I mean, I was 18 when this film came out, so I didn't really have much interest in going to see it. To be honest, I put this in the category of Chicken Little, which is, when it came out, I didn't even realise this was a Disney film. Like many people, I just pair this with Jimmy Neutron and just think, oh, it's just some weird early 3D CGI film. I say early, I mean, Toy Story's like more than 10 years old at the time this came out, but still. So yeah, this was my second watch of it. Both times it's been to do the whole set of watching all the animated classics. This is the one I've got the biggest gap with, so I could remember almost nothing about this film. How about you?
Very similar to you. I was 17 and far too cool.
Well, that's not that similar to me, because I was 18.
I was 17 and I don't remember this either, except I didn't even realise it existed. I first became aware of this film when Tangled came out. And I saw that Tangled was the 50th, so I looked through the list and I saw this on the list and I was like, what the hell is this? And when did it come out? It just appeared overnight for me. And similarly, this is my second watch of this. I think I first saw it maybe 2 years ago. So it's not too fresh in my mind, but I knew the major beats going into it and I was interested to revisit it. So as always, before we can decide whether or not this is going to make the list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics, we're going to take a look through the plot of this film, talking about any production details that we think are interesting, and obviously deciding which character we think is the sexiest. So we open our film in a really strange fashion. It's all sepia and it's raining, and we join a young woman leaving a child at the steps of an orphanage, kind of breaking the Disney mold here. Instead of a parent dying, they're just giving up the child. So nice change of pace from Disney there. And the child in question is our protagonist. I don't know why I'm questioning that. He is our protagonist. He's not at this point, he's a baby, but...
Well, he's still a protagonist, but yeah, he doesn't spend the film as a baby.
No, because we jump forward to him being maybe like a boy of 8, 9 or 10, somewhere around there. And he's a kind of quirky boy genius, because apparently if you're making an animated film in the noughties, every focus group is like, your protagonist needs to be a boy genius. We've got Jimmy Neutron, we've got Chicken Little, we've got Lewis.
Now hang on, are you calling Chicken Little a boy genius? Because he's neither a boy nor a genius. He's a chicken of average intelligence.
That's a very good point, actually. But they tried shoehorning in with the whole like, hey, look, he can make a jetpack out of a soda bottle. That makes him a genius.
I'll say this for Lewis. His main character arc is about finding a family and what family means. And he's not only doing better than Chicken Little in terms of intelligence, but also in terms of parents. Because even though he doesn't have any parents, I'd say that's better than having the worst parent, i.e. Cluck Buck or Buck Cluck. I don't know what Chicken Little's dad's called. Anyway, that's enough about Chicken Little. We're never going back to it.
You say that, but our opening kind of introduction to Lewis is an adoption interview where he's meeting prospective parents, and they might not be Cluck Buck, but they're not far off. These might be the worst people to be looking to adopt a child. So the setup for the scene is Lewis is an inventor, and he's an inventor in that way that all it means is you just stick random objects together from around the house and suddenly you have a new invention.
I mean, to be fair, he's only 12. They won't give him a soldering iron.
So yeah, he's just sort of throwing together some kind of... It looks like a beer hat, but for peanut butter and jelly. And much to the disinterest of both the woman who owns the orphanage and his very anemic-looking roommate, Goob, who I get what they're going for, Goob is kept up a lot by Lewis, so he's tired. But that only really happens in a bit, so I guess it's just that they didn't want to make two character models again. It's the turkey mayor from Chicken Little all over again. So there's just a very ill-looking boy sharing a room with Lewis at this point.
And as you say, he's got this interview with them, which, again, I imagine for a kid is probably an incredibly stressful and difficult process to go through. And these adults are giving him nothing to work with here. He's going, hey, look, here's my invention. I've come up with this thing. And rather than being like, proper adults talking to children who they ostensibly want to adopt, they're just like, well, that's stupid. They don't say that, but it's heavily implied. They just have no interest in it. They disregard everything he says. They're the worst adoptive parents possible, and they should be ashamed of themselves.
My favourite line from this interview is the dad asking the man, he's not a dad yet. He should never be a dad at this rate. The man asking, what's your favourite sport? And Lewis responds, is inventing a sport? And it's like, no, shut up, kid. They're the worst. But they kind of get a comeuppance. Lewis is excited to show off his peanut butter and jelly hat that solves the problem of portioning with making these sandwiches. And the couple start reacting quite, cautiously. And the invention explodes, covering them both with peanut butter and jelly. And the man breaks out in just a terrible allergic reaction and they storm off angrily, which, I get, but he is a child and he's quite enthusiastic. I think it's quite sweet. As an audience, we're definitely endeared to Lewis, but no, it's gone terribly and he's upset. I think he says even that, this is the 124th interview he's had and just nobody wants him. I do wonder how many of them are almost killed by his inventions, though, as well.
I don't think that's on him. They don't go, oh, by the way, don't get any peanut butter out because I'm dangerously allergic to it. They're just like, oh, well, it's their own fault. I'm not saying they deserve to die, but they do deserve to die.
Well, there's quite a nice little line, actually, where the woman who runs the orphanage comes to see Lewis and console him, and she mentions about the poor man, and Lewis reacts very shocked, being like, he's dead?
Now, since we're talking about the characters and these inventions, we can't really go any further without talking about the animation and aesthetic of this film. How do you feel about the way this film looks?
It's clearly partly inspired by the aesthetic of the William Joyce picture book, but it's also a strange hybrid with trying to look like every other studio's animation at the time. I can completely see why you didn't realise this was a Disney film when it came out, because I don't think it has any real hallmark of a Disney film in its story, definitely not in its aesthetic. It's a choice, I'll give them that.
I'm going to say it, I think this film looks worse than Chicken Little.
This film didn't give me headaches like Chicken Little did. I think Chicken Little is running on less frames somehow. I think it's very jittery. This is a bit smoother, but yeah, I can see that the aesthetic choices are very subjective, and I can definitely see not liking the appeal. I will say, at least in this film, most of the background characters are distinct, unlike the same copy-pasted animal model from Chicken Little, covered in gross fur.
I think it just looks cheap, and I think some of the proportions on characters are quite weird. They have a sort of intangible quality, like they're not really solid, they are just blobs of CGI being moved around on the screen, which you don't have to spoil it for me, I know that's what they are. But I just find it hard to really make any of it feel tangible. I think it's a really bright film as well, and again, there's not any kind of shadow or anything on characters, so again, it feels quite flat. It doesn't really feel like they're in a 3D space a lot of the time.
If you ever watch this for a third time, one thing I would look out for is characters interacting with objects. I usually notice this on doors in this film, but everything's kind of hovering a little bit because they're two separate models that don't flex when they interact. Now we're at a point where if a character holds on to something, the shape of their hand will change to reflect that. They come into contact with another object, there's forces being exerted there. It is wonderful what we're seeing at the moment, but this was still very much dealing with teething problems of 3D animation, and I think in this film in particular, whenever two 3D models meet, it feels like they're floating next to each other, and it can take you out of it if you end up focusing on it too much, which, as it turns out, is something I did on this second viewing.
So Lewis storms up to the roof after this disastrous interview. It's framed and shot in a very similar way to the Oh Hi Mark scene from The Room, which is my main note about the whole scene.
Oh, I didn't realise, but it absolutely is just that scene.
Maybe I'll edit them back to back so people can see what I mean. As you also touched on the character of Goob, who is Lewis's roommate, I've got quite a lot to say about Goob. First off, they're very upset when Lewis's interviews don't go well, but no one seems to give a damn whether Goob gets adopted or not. I mean, he's generally a character I can identify with because he's one of those people who always looks and is tired, which I think is the best description of myself I can come up with. But you're right, so we get this whole thing of... And this gets worsened as Lewis gets his focus, which we'll talk about in a moment, where Lewis is up all night inventing and it keeps Goob up all night, so he's always knackered. Why isn't Lewis tired? Is he one of those annoying people who gets less sleep than me, but is still more energised? Sorry, this is getting very personal for me.
So yeah, on the roof in this interaction with Mildred, the woman who runs the orphanage, she's trying to comfort Lewis, who feels like nobody wants him and he's always going to be alone. And in doing so, she kind of makes things worse because Lewis argues, in a way quite rightly, that his whole life has just been rejection. Even his own mother didn't want him. And Mildred turns around and says, look, you can't blame your mother. Nobody knows anything about her. We don't know that she didn't want you. There's lots of reasons a parent would give up a child. Like maybe they just aren't able to take care of you, which, whilst is true and a reasonable thing to try and explain to a child, it's a bit weird that she's so dismissive of his anger and being so upset. Like, this child has plenty of reason for being upset with his situation in life, and that's perfectly valid.
No, it's not. He needs to get over it. Stop being angry at everyone else and take responsibility, damn it. You're 12.
And so Lewis misinterprets this and says, you know what, you're right. Like, my mum just wasn't able to take care of me, but she is the only person that has ever loved me. I'm going to figure out a way of finding her. And his solution is to realise that he's the only person that's ever seen her. Within the context of the orphanage, she's not like some spectre. Well, I mean, she might be some spectre who pops in and out of reality, for all we know. He realises that her face will be somewhere in his deep memory, and so he's going to invent a device that will scan his mind for his earliest memories, which I'm just going to say is a step up in complexity from a gun that spreads peanut butter and jelly. But good on him for being encouraged, I suppose.
Which, spoiler warning, the gun that fires peanut butter never works, but the mind-scanning machine does. I could invent a gun that fires peanut butter.
And so, yeah, we get this, I was going to say nice sequence. We get a sequence of Lewis inventing this device, keeping his poor roommate up, and preparing for the science fair where he's going to show off his invention. Which, this is a weird sort of motivation here, because his motivation is that he wants to find his mother, but while he's at it, I may as well show off and win a science fair.
There's zero reason for him to test it for the first time at the science fair. It's not like he's making it and his teacher's gone, where's your science project? And he's gone, oh god, it can be this. There was no pressure. The teacher's like, hey, great, you're doing a thing. Well done, you.
I really like the teacher. I think the teacher's voiced by Tom Kenny as well. It's clearly SpongeBob when they're talking, which is just quite nice to see Tom Kenny working with Disney.
He also looks just like Dash's teacher in The Incredibles, and it makes me wonder if they go to the same school.
Anyway, all of this is set to another just a pop song in the background. Disney's very much firmly planted its feet in the we're going to do the DreamWorks style of music in films. Which I think this is the only time it happens in the film as well. Or if it happens at any other time, I've just completely blanked it because I just find that style of music quite forgettable. Again, it serves its purpose. It's a good way of doing a montage, but look at Mulan. Disney has done far better montages in the past.
That's a really good point, because to all intents and purposes, that song from Mulan doesn't need to be in universe, and it would work just as well. Can we just watch Mulan?
What we'll do is we'll invent a machine that scans our memory, and then we can just watch Mulan on that.
Ben, your memories mostly seem to be focusing on how hot you find this horse.
And so this is basically the setup of our film. We've got the science fair and everything is going swimmingly well for Lewis. For some strange reason, as you say, he didn't test it before getting to the science fair. Also, he chooses to test this on himself. Now, if I were a skeptic and someone presented me a device that can read minds and they tested it on themselves, I would say, that's not proof. I don't know your memories.
He doesn't know his memories, so he won't even know it's worked for him, because he'll go, well, there's a woman. I don't know if that's the right memory or not.
My mum was Mulan.
So we've got the antics of the science fair, and we've got a crazy scientist lady who's come to visit to help judge, and also the gym teacher, who I think probably gets some of the best laughs in this film. And all of a sudden this weird boy with this pointy haircut shows up and says he's a time cop, and that Lewis has to make sure his machine isn't intervened, and has he seen a guy with a bowler hat and all this. And Lewis is just kind of like, cool, yeah, whatever, you're nuts, which I think is a perfectly reasonable reaction.
Yeah, I really like this initial dynamic between Wilbur and Lewis. I think as far as a leading duo goes, it's set up really well. You've got quite a serious character who's very grounded in reality with quite a tragic want. He just wants to find his mum and have a family at last. And then you introduce a bit of anarchy into it, I suppose, really, in the form of this strange boy claiming to be a time cop. But alongside him, you also have the aforementioned bowler hat guy, who is the villain of our piece, who we cut to, and he's this kind of shabby-looking, Dick Dastardly-looking fellow.
He looks like he could be out of Tim Burton or Lemony Snicket. He looks like a pantomime villain.
Interestingly as well, he is voiced by Steven Anderson, the writer-director of the film, and I could definitely see in his performance this is a character he was really excited about.
I think this performance is the best one in the film, and it's genuinely a thing where some of the stuff that happens with this character, and a lot of the comedy particularly, I was thinking, I think if this performance was weaker, I don't think I'd enjoy this, but genuinely, I think it sold really, really well, and I think this was clearly where a lot of his passion for this went, and yeah, I have a lot of time for Bowler Hat Guy.
I'd agree. I'd say that Bowler Hat Guy probably has the highest hit rate of jokes in this film, and I think a large part of that is the performance and also the fact that it's clearly exactly what the writer-director wanted. And Bowler Hat Guy is accompanied by a bowler hat. He has a small robotic bowler hat, which is so strange, but I really love, and it can fly, and it interferes with Lewis's science project, leading to just a huge embarrassment when Lewis activates the machine. It doesn't work, and it flies apart, I think, at one point, and it leads to this domino effect of the whole science fair just falling into chaos and Lewis being humiliated and not having retrieved his memory about his mum. And he's convinced at this point, it didn't work because I'm no good. I'm the problem.
Now, it's at this point where I feel if you haven't seen this film and it's of any interest to you, you should go away and watch it. Make sure you come back and listen to the rest of the podcast, like and subscribe, because there's some interesting stuff that happens. This film definitely takes a turn, so this is your point of no return. Okay, let's go.
Yeah, this may have seemed like quite a dry and serious premise, but the film just massively turns with the introduction of these two characters and becomes a lot lighter and a lot wackier, because Wilbur tries to encourage Lewis to go back to the invention and say, look, you have to do this. This is really important. The problem isn't you. It works. You just have to believe in yourself. And Lewis responds with, why should I believe you? Who even are you? You're not a time cop coming to help me. You're just some crazy person who has ruined my day. And infuriated by this accusation, Wilbur's like, fine, I'll show you that I'm a time cop, and pulls out his time machine and he takes Lewis to the future. And that's now where the rest of our film is set. A very strange turn.
There's no build-up to it. He says, you want proof that I'm a time traveller? Well, we're going to the future. And that's it. And then we see this weird future where all these sort of wacky inventions, people get around in bubbles, and it's this very sort of, I guess, 1950s version of futurism, and it's very bright and colourful and slightly nauseating.
I would describe it as an inflatable and colourful version of Walt Disney's Tomorrowland. And I feel that's what they were going for, is let's do a modern take on that retro-futuristic that Walt envisioned through Tomorrowland. I think they have a direct call to it where it says welcome to Todayland, which I think is quite nice.
In doing this, they crash the time machine and Wilbur basically tells Lewis he has to fix it, and then he'll take him back in time to see his mother when she left him on the doorstep of the orphanage. So this is going to be our kind of main relationship, is Wilbur and Lewis. Wilbur desperately trying to fix things, and we get dribs and drabs throughout the film of why he wants to fix this and why he knows what he knows, and then Lewis desperately trying to fix this to get Wilbur to uphold his end of the deal.
Yeah, because as soon as the crash happens, which I think is quite a nice little scene where Wilbur is basically saying, well, I've shown you the future, time to take you back, and Lewis is like, hey, you've got a time machine, go take me to see my mum. They fight. Lewis tries to steal the time machine, resulting in the crash. As soon as the crash happens, Wilbur drops the facade and it's like, oh no, I'm in trouble. My parents are going to kill me. I'm not even supposed to look at this time machine, let alone drive it. It's clear that he doesn't know what he's doing. He is also a kid out of his depth who's just kind of, for some reason, gone back to the past to see Lewis. Meanwhile, back in the past, we have one of my favourite scenes of the film, which is Bowler Hat Guy stealing Lewis's invention, the hat fixing the damage it did to it, and then going to just an invention company to pitch it. It's in this scene that we see that Bowler Hat Guy is basically an idiot. And the brains of the outfit is the bowler hat. And what I love about this is it's the original pitch for Jafar and Iago.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't get me wrong, I love the Jafar and Iago dynamic, but this is a really fun dynamic. And what's more, the bowler hat can't speak. It communicates entirely through physicality and signs when it needs to communicate directly, which I think is really nice. And it still has this very strong, sinister character, which is a testament to just how wonderful animation is, that you can create a character so strongly, completely visually.
Just to be clear, he is incredibly stupid. We're not talking like he's stupid compared to other characters or compared to evil villains. He's comically inept, and it shouldn't work and it should annoy me, but for whatever reason he just cuts through me and I like him.
And this boardroom scene, there's a couple of things I love about it, and I'm not sure if this was intentional or not, but other than the head of the company, everyone else in the boardroom is just the exact same white man, but with different hair colours. And again, it might just be saving on assets by reusing the same model, but it just got to me watching it today that I was like, everyone in this boardroom is just the exact same white man, and that's hilarious to me.
I mean, I guess in a lot of ways it's like a lot of boardrooms in the world, sadly.
And they ask the bowler hat guy, okay, what are you here to do? And he responds quite dramatically, I will crush the dreams of a poor little orphan boy.
We don't get an explanation of what Bowler Hat Guy's motivations are for a very long time, and you are just like, what is this? Because again, we get the scene of Wilbur and Lewis travelling in the future, and we get a few minutes of that, and then we get this extended sequence of Bowler Hat Guy trying to sell Lewis's mind scanner to a big company, and you're watching it and going, what has this got to do with anything?
And back in the future, we've got a panicking Wilbur who tells Lewis he needs to fix a time machine. A boy who can't even make a working peanut butter and jelly distributor gun is being told to fix a time machine. And he's like, okay, but I'm going to need some blueprints. So they introduce us to Wilbur's robot butler, Carl. And one thing was really weird when Carl shows up, because he looks exactly like the protagonist in Blue Sky Animation's Robots. And I looked into it, and it turns out that the design of Carl, and really the design of all these characters, are ripped from William Joyce's picture book. But William Joyce was working on Robots as a character designer at this time, so I was like, that makes a lot of sense, but it's very jarring to see Carl and go, that's the Ewan McGregor robot.
You're absolutely right, and I'd not even clocked that. I was mostly just like, this character is just Ben from Treasure Planet again.
I think he's a little more likeable than Ben.
Well, that's a low bar.
And he's also not as prominent. I enjoy it because Carl's reaction to Lewis is to scream, because he immediately realises he's from the past. And he's like, why did you bring someone from the past here? And the giveaway is his hair. And I quite like this because it's just not explained that the giveaway that he's from the past is his hair. And watching this, no one in the future seems to have blonde hair. So the first time I was watching this, I was like, is this a future where just blonde people were eradicated or something?
Man, that's dark.
But until we get the explanation, that's kind of what the implication is.
I just assumed because he had spiky hair and they were like, God, you look so naughty. What, with your 3/4 length trousers and your Vans trainers?
Because the hair is a dead giveaway then, Wilbur just puts, like, a fruit hat over Lewis. And I think this kind of sums up a lot of the humour in this film. Because one thing that caught me off guard the first time I saw this film was just how weird the humour is. And I was thinking that on a second time, once the shock of it being weird has worn off, it wouldn't get to me. And yet, through things like the bowler hat guy and just how strange some of the humour in this film is, I found myself laughing at the stupidest shit watching this film.
Let's talk about the stupidest shit then, because through a series of wacky goings-on, Lewis ends up meeting Wilbur's entire family, the Robinsons of the title, starting with an old man who wears his clothes backwards and various other people. Liam, tell us about the Robinsons.
So firstly, what's so strange about this is the whole sequence of finding Grandpa Bud's teeth, and in doing so meeting all of the Robinsons, feels so disjointed and at odds with the rest of the film. And it turns out that this is the plot of the children's book that it's based on, is finding the grandpa's teeth. And in doing so, you know, every page is a new character and they're wacky and you meet them. And I was like, okay, that makes sense in a children's book. It's weird when you spend 5 to 10 minutes of your film doing it though, because it kind of relies on the zaniness of the characters. And each one is weird in their own way. I find them a little annoying. But luckily, despite this film being called Meet the Robinsons, they're barely in it.
I'm going to go further than a bit annoying, Liam. I don't like any of these characters, and I find a lot of them intolerable.
I like the twins who hide in flower pots and ask you to ring their respective doorbells.
I like that it's never explained, and no one knows who they are.
And yeah, because when they're going over the family tree, Lewis is like, who are the twins related to? And Wilbur just responds with, nobody knows. So they're just there. I think this all culminates in probably the weirdest and the most annoying of all of the family members, which is, well, not the family members, because the mum, Franny, is fine, but her shtick is that she teaches frogs to wear suits and sing like Jamie Cullen. And it's just this weird... To be fair, I will say, I forgot that happened, and when it happened, it made me laugh again, because it's just so stupid.
So, yeah, the Jamie Cullen frog has the grandpa's teeth. What I find weird about it is that when they squeeze him and the teeth come out, the frog still has the teeth. So, why did it need the human teeth? Also, the one that stands out to me of the Robinsons...
Is it the one that's married to a puppet?
Yeah, it is. And I think that is way darker than they intended it to be, because he's like this very sort of cowed and quiet person, and he's got a puppet wife who is just horrible to him and hits him at one point, and I was like, this isn't as funny as you think it is. This is just horrible and tragic, because either that is just a puppet and that's what he projects onto it, which is horrible, or somehow the puppet has sentience and is abusive towards him. Neither of those are good outcomes.
It's just weird and it's relentless. And as I've said, I'll admit, I found some of it funny. What I found funny about it was that this was actually happening in a Disney animated classic. And then, as I say, after this sequence is done, they're like, forget about the Robinsons. Nobody cares. Let's just focus on Bowler Hat Guy.
It'd be like getting the first 20 minutes of Tarzan and then the next 20 minutes of The Emperor's New Groove. That's what it's like.
And then the last 20 minutes of Back to the Future 2. So Wilbur freaks out. He's like, oh no, they're going to figure out I've brought someone from the past. He grabs Lewis back. They have a nice little sequence where Wilbur quizzes Lewis on the family and the family tree, and it has one of my favourite jokes in the film where it's every time they mention a character, it will show just a painted portrait of them, and it's zooming about very quickly. And Lewis has yet to meet Wilbur's dad, Cornelius, So that picture is blank and they stop on it and Lewis asks, what does your dad look like? And Wilbur pauses and just says, Tom Selleck. And then when it cuts back, there's just a painting of, like a photorealistic painting of Tom Selleck for Cornelius, which I just really enjoy. They just resume the bit then.
Again, spoiler warning, he doesn't look like Tom Selleck. He's voiced by Tom Selleck, but he doesn't look like him.
I thought they were doing something here, and I really distinctly remember me following this in my head the first time I watched it and thinking I knew what was going on. So to me, I thought that the Tom Selleck was a reference to Bowler Hat Guy, and that Bowler Hat Guy, because he's got a mustache. Again, he's more Dick Dastardly than Tom Selleck, but I was thinking that Bowler Hat Guy was some kind of like alternate time version, or even Cornelius himself, but had been corrupted by the hat.
That's certainly an interesting route to go with it.
And I only thought that because of them saying Tom Selleck, and I was like, well, Bowler Hat Guy has a mustache. As it turns out, it's not that. It's much weirder.
So let's talk about what Bowler Hat Guy's up to. So, with his plan having failed, he realises he needs to get the machine fixed, and we see his little checklist that he's got, and he writes on a new box saying, get boy to fix machine or something. And he decides to go back to the orphanage to find Lewis, but Lewis isn't there, and it's just Goob sat there looking sad. And Goob explains that he fell asleep during the big baseball game and missed the key catch, and not only was that the worst thing that could possibly happen to him, then everyone just beats him up for no reason, which again, I feel there should be adults present at the baseball game stopping this, but fine. And Bowler Hat Guy says to Goob to hold on to that bitterness and don't let it go, and Goob's like, there's a strange man in this building and I'm not going to tell anyone.
I wish everyone had beat Chicken Little up after the baseball game. I really enjoyed this interaction with Bowler Hat Guy and Goob, and Bowler Hat Guy realises that there's time travel residue, so clearly Wilbur has taken Lewis back to the future, so he takes his time machine and goes after them, and now we have this bit where Bowler Hat Guy's trying to kidnap Lewis and get him away from the Robinsons, so that he can get Lewis to fix the machine. And there's this weird bit where Lewis has to have dinner with the family. It's just extended hijinks. There's one bit where it turns into like a black and white, almost samurai movie between the mum and her brother, and they're throwing food at each other. And I'm just like, this is so weird and annoying, but also I'm laughing for some reason.
I'm going to say that I wasn't laughing during this sequence, and they did start putting on Japanese accents, and I was like, is this okay? I don't know that it is.
This is why I'm laughing. It's just so audacious, and I'm just like, what the hell are they doing? A lot of the humour in this film comes from the fact that I'm just so taken aback by how bizarre and weird it is.
So, I suppose the question is, Liam, you're finding this funny. Do you think the reaction you're having is the intended reaction, or are you laughing at it in spite of itself?
I'm laughing at the film rather than with the film during these moments.
Yeah, and I think that's significant. Although it's still part of the experience, I guess. So, Bowler Hat Guy and the bowler hat, who's called Doris, by the way, or he calls her Doris anyway, conspire to take out the Robinsons and kidnap Lewis. Doris is a lot more methodical, and she's going to drop a chandelier on the Robinsons. And Bowler Hat Guy spends a long time thinking about the best thing he can do and decides to travel back in time and get a dinosaur and just introduce a dinosaur into the equation.
I love his plans that he comes up with. The first one is, how can I get Lewis out of the house? I know I'll blow up the house. Oh wait, no, then he'll be dead. And then his second one is, I know, I'll turn him into a duck. Oh wait, I don't know how to do that, and I don't need a duck. He's just so stupid, and it's performed so wonderfully.
He's basically a comic book evil genius, but he's not a genius, he's very stupid.
Because, yeah, his first plan that he actually tries doing is he uses the hat to possess a frog, Mario Odyssey style. It obviously doesn't work because the frog just turns around and is like, when Bowler Hat Guy's like, why aren't you kidnapping him? And he's like, there are a lot of people over there, and I have short arms. I don't think this plan was very well thought through. So yeah, he then ends up deciding, yeah, go back in time, take a dinosaur. And there's an extended action sequence of the Robinsons escaping this dinosaur. And again, a nice little bit where the dinosaur can't really enact the plan either, because he too has little arms and a large head. I don't think this plan was very well thought through.
Now, can Bowler Hat Guy talk to anything? Or does the bowler hat translate? Because the dinosaur's speaking dinosaur and he understands it. So does Bowler Hat Guy speak dinosaur, or does he just speak bowler hat?
I think we're not supposed to question that.
Damn it, Liam, that's all I do on these podcasts. Question things that aren't meant to be questioned. So, the Robinsons use all their wacky hijinks, and Lewis saves Wilbur from the dinosaur, and then the Robinsons basically decide that they're just going to adopt Lewis. They've been with him about an hour, and they think that's enough. We're going to take responsibility for this child.
It's very strange, isn't it? There's not much of a build-up of a relationship, mostly because there's that first act, and then the second act is just wacky hijinks, so there's not really any time to build a relationship. I compare it to something like Emperor's New Groove, where, yeah, there's a lot of wacky hijinks, but I believe the relationship that is building between these two characters, whereas here it's just like, hey, you're cool, you're an orphan, we'll adopt you. And then he's like, oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I'll do that. And then Wilbur's like, nope, you can't adopt him. You just can't adopt him. And then he pulls the hat off and he's like, he's from the past. And everyone's seeing his blonde hair and it's like, oh no, you're one of the victims of the blonde genocide from the past. You need to go back.
You need to go back and die in your proper time.
Genuinely, this was my understanding the first time I watched this film, was clearly he's from the past because he has blonde hair and no one in the future does.
I think the reason this scene has no emotional heft to it, and comparing it to The Emperor's New Groove again, there's too many Robinsons. There's not one that he has time to build a connection with, much like Cusco and Pacha, who we've got two characters and their relationship. This is just, as you say, the characters exist to serve jokes and be... I mean, I'm not going to call them stereotypes, because they're not really. They're just kind of weird, strange beings. But there's definitely no heart to any of this.
They try to add a bit of heart through the mother. She's the only one that is an actual person, whereas the rest are just zany weirdos. One thing that annoyed me is a lot of the time they just come across as eccentric billionaires, and I don't know, but something just really irritated me about that. I was like, they're just burning money, firing each other out of cannons. I hate this.
Yeah, only two of them seem to have a job. That's the Tom Selleck dad, who we've not seen, but he works for a big invention company, and the guy who delivers pizzas, and I suspect one of them isn't bringing in a lot of money. Actually, there's one bit we skipped over a little bit, which I did want to touch on, which is during the dinner sequence when they're having dessert, Carl, the robo-butler, brings out a peanut butter and jelly gun, which gets clogged. And again, we get the same thing of it sprays everyone. And he has this moment of, oh no, I failed again. And they're like, no, it's great, you failed. That's when you learn. It's meant to be, oh, these people accept me when things go wrong, and that's nice. And they say, keep moving forward, and they really hammer this home, which I'll talk about later. But for me, if I was with people I'd just met and made a huge mess during dinner, and they started going, well done, you failed, and started applauding, I think it would just be very sarcastic and passive-aggressive. It wouldn't make me feel better.
But the other problem is no one else really berates him in the first act when he... Well, I suppose there's the man he almost kills.
But the man doesn't have a go at him. He's just upset because he nearly died.
But, like, Mildred is like, it's okay. Like, you didn't do anything wrong. And his science teacher is really encouraging for him. It's not as if he doesn't have support in the first act. Really, we need more sequences of him being an outsider, which we don't really get because there's not the time for it. But yeah, they see his hair, realise he's from the past, and they're like, yep, you've got to go home. You can't live with us. I know we just promised to adopt you and our house is cool and we live in the future, but you're not welcome here. Get out of here.
Psych. What's worse than not adopting a child? Telling them you'll adopt them and then not letting them be adopted.
There really needs to be more time between these two events. Like, he stays with them for a while and then it's revealed. And they're like, we've made a huge mistake. You have to leave.
During this drama, Wilbur spills that he was never planning to take Lewis to see his mother. Lewis, betrayed, runs away, where he bumps into Bowler Hat Guy, who says, I will take you to see your mother. All you need to do is fix your thought machine for me. And they fly off to get it done.
And that's exactly what Lewis does. He fixes it, and as soon as he's fixed it, he's like, hey, go take me to see my mother. And Bowler Hat Guy and Doris are like, nope, I had my fingers crossed, so I was lying. And Lewis is like, why are you doing this? Why are you trying to ruin my life? And he explains that he wants revenge against Cornelius, Wilbur's dad, because he ruined his life. And Lewis, still not understanding what is going on, is like, I still don't see what that has to do with me. And he's like, don't you understand? You are Cornelius. Like, this is your invention. It kickstarted your whole career. I'm going to change the past by stealing your invention and ruin your future. And Lewis is like, that's weird, but I still don't understand what it's got to do with you. And this is it. This is my favourite reveal, possibly in all of Disney, because it's just so weird, where Bowler Hat Guy says, allow me to explain. He turns on the light and they're in Lewis's room at the orphanage, to which Lewis says, why are we in my old room? And Bowler Hat Guy responds with, I think you mean our old room. Pulls his shabby cloak off to reveal he's wearing a child's baseball uniform that's all grubby from 30 years of wear, because this is the grown-up version of Goob. I didn't see this coming the first time I watched this film.
No, I didn't either, because Goob is like very much in the background and just like a kind of a joke character. I think weird is the best term for it, really. It's so strange. And then we get this very depressing montage of basically Goob goes back after getting beaten up, and basically he's just left in the orphanage. Like, they close the orphanage and they're like, oh, that kid will be alright. No one seems to care that he just lives there as a weird hermit. We do see a couple of times when he has interviews with prospective parents and all he can talk about is how the baseball game ruined his life. And it's this horrible montage of him just getting old and weird and creepy, and then at the end of it he decides he's going to get revenge. Now, I do feel there's a bit of a plot hole here, in that there's a dramatic reveal of we're in our old bedroom. Did Lewis not see that they'd landed it on the orphanage and walked into the orphanage? The power of editing.
I don't think they went back in time at this point. I think they're in the future version of the orphanage, so I think I got that wrong. So maybe it's just like open and he doesn't recognise it. Mainly because everywhere outside of the futuristic city is just an endless grass wasteland as well. So I don't even know where this orphanage is.
A grass wasteland? I think that's a field.
You look at that just emptiness outside of the city and tell me that's not a wasteland. It's like the Windows XP screensaver or background.
It may well have been, given the time this film was made. Again, this is very much, I'm going to now explain everything that's been going on in the film. So Bowler Hat Guy / Goob carries on.
I'm glad he did, because I was not following it.
So he explains his amazing plan for revenge, which is throwing eggs and toilet paper at Cornelius' invention building, which is great. But then he bumps into Doris, the bowler hat, and they go for lunch. And Doris explains that she was an invention of Cornelius's, was going to be the helping hat, but she had more grand designs and was deactivated, or supposedly deactivated, and left just to rot. But she escaped, and the two of them have teamed up to ruin Cornelius's life. So they followed Wilbur home, which is quite creepy now I say that they were just following a teenage boy home. And they steal the time machine, and obviously that leads to everything that happens at the science fair.
And so we're into the third act, and I don't know about you, Ben, but I find the third act very functional.
I mean, I really don't know what else to expect, because, as you say, the first act of this film is a somewhat irreverent but character-focused thing. Then the middle is just tons of hijinks and stupid jokes, a lot of which don't really have any bearing to anything. Then there's no sort of heartfelt drama, so it's very difficult to have a direction to go with this climax, so they just go with, let's just have some more wacky hijinks.
Because, yeah, what happens is, with the memory reader functional, Goob of the future goes back to the invention company and pitches it, and is also like, I've also got this invention, I call it the helping hat. And in doing so, it's revealed that this was Doris's grand plan all along, and doing so, in Back to the Future 2 style, is erasing the future that we've seen and replacing it with a hat dystopia?
Yeah, everything is just bowler hat shaped, and there's bowler hats everywhere, and there's some giant bowler hats. You say it's functional. I don't know what to make of any of this. Going back to when we said this is the point of no return, I don't think you're expecting a showdown in a bowler hat dystopia when you were 20 minutes into this film.
One thing I enjoy about this alternate future is the Robinsons all still exist, but they've been possessed by hats. So I was like, so Lewis still goes on to get adopted and marry Fran and have this extended family.
Except for Wilbur. Wilbur doesn't exist.
Oh, I suppose it's just that Fran's family exists. Wait, I genuinely don't know how they're all related, because Lewis is adopted by the grandparents, and they have the cowlick, the signature family cowlick. Bud does. But Fran has it as well. And then his brothers have... It's very incestuous. I don't understand it quite. Because, like, genetically,
Liam, one of them's an eldritch abomination monster.
I forgot about Lefty. Oh, they kill Carl as well, because you can have murder when there's robots. Sorry, this whole third act is a bit weird, and Lewis, under all this pressure, he manages to fix the time machine and goes back to intervene with Goob signing the contract. And I actually quite like the resolution of how things are fixed, because Doris intervenes and is like getting quite angry because Goob, bowler hat guy, isn't signing the contract. And Lewis just stares her down and just says, "I'm never going to invent you." And she just disappears. And I'm like, that's quite clever. It's a nice way of using time travel and alternate universes to fix your problem. I don't really understand why there's a ticking clock in the third act when you have time travel involved, actually.
There's a lot of plot holes when you look back at this film, Liam, but that's inevitable with time travel. And I think, to be fair, given there's so much time travel in this, they do a reasonable job of it not being too messy. They basically go with the rule of if you change something in the past, the future instantly changes, which generally seems fairly consistent.
Yeah, it's, as I say, it's all functional. It ties the wackiness up with a neat bow. Lewis has saved the future, and everything comes back to normal. The family are all there. Wilbur rematerializes into existence from the existential dread of being erased from time. At which point, Tom Selleck is home early, and Lewis finally gets to meet his future self, who just looks just like Lewis and nothing like Tom Selleck, which I do enjoy. And alongside this, obviously, Goob, whilst the villain of the piece, like, he's a tragic villain, and he was being manipulated by the true villain, a hat. And so Lewis is like, you don't have to be angry anymore, like, you don't have to be alone anymore. This family will adopt you, a fully grown man. And so he calls to the family and he's like, come adopt my friend Goob. And he turns around and Goob is gone, which is quite sad.
And all that's been left really is a new to-do list, and all there is an empty tick box with a question mark next to it, and then bowler hat guy / Goob, we see him wander off to find his destiny, which is a weirdly poignant moment for such a ridiculous character. Again, I think Steven Anderson fell in love with this character, and basically the rest of the film doesn't really have anything going for it in terms of emotional beats, but he decided he loved this character.
Bowler hat guy is screwed in this future. Like, he's an idiot. He doesn't even have his hat to show him the way.
Well, we do get some resolution on this then. So Lewis still has to go back to the past / the present, and Wilbur hops in the time machine and takes him back. But he actually takes him back to when his mother was leaving him in a box outside an orphanage. And this is Lewis's chance to see her, but just as he gets close, he changes his mind and decides he doesn't need to. And this, for me, is one of the weirdest things in this film, because at the start of this film, the setup is, I need to find my mum to be complete. And then that's kind of what Lewis is trying to do throughout the whole film. And at the end, when he finds her, he goes, actually, I don't need to. And the moral of it seems to be, you need to get over being an orphan.
So I like what they're going for, because it's a little bit different than that. What it is, it's the classic want versus need dilemma. And Lewis wants to know who his mother is, thinking that will get him a family. But what he needs is a family. And by going to the future, he's been shown that, like, look, it works out in the end. You find a family. And that's what he needs. So his want has been superseded by this point. And that's what this sequence at the end represents. The problem is that's quite a poignant arc for a character in an incredibly messy and wacky film.
Yeah, it doesn't really have any emotional resonance to it, unfortunately. But then, following this, Wilbur does return Lewis to the science fair, because obviously that's where his first invention was a success. Lewis manages to fix it and get this machine working, but obviously he doesn't have a memory he wants to revisit now, so he gets the scientist judging it to revisit it, and she chooses the day of her marriage, at which point he realises that Grandpa Bud is the person she married, who is also just now there, and that's when he realises this is the day that I meet the people who adopt me. Now, I'm going to say this about his adopted parents. It's pretty bad that they didn't recognise him immediately when he was in the future, because he looks exactly the same. Like, I like to think my parents can still remember what I looked like when I was 12.
Not just when you were 12, but looking exactly the same as the day you first met.
Wearing the same clothes. As far as I can tell, they just look at that and they go, oh, it's the blonde spiky-haired thing.
He also meets his future wife on this day, which is a bit... There's something sinister about Lewis's ending, because he's just like, hey, I know my future. I'm just going to roll with it. And I'm just like... He's got like this weird satisfied smirk when he meets Fran. And I'm like, you're still going to have to work at this relationship. You can't just find this girl and be like, well, you're my future wife. Deal with it.
We do get one other resolution in this final act where, on returning to the present, Lewis shouts to Goober to wake him up and he makes the winning catch in the baseball game. Presumably meaning he never turns into Bowler Hat Guy, which means that Bowler Hat Guy doesn't live a terrible, terrible life, I guess.
Well, no, all the kids still beat him up, but he now blames it on something else. And I don't know, don't know where I'm going with that.
He may well still be an idiot or a psychopath, but just a more successful one.
Yeah, I like as well that we didn't need to see the future version of Bowler Hat Guy. I think it would have been one too many elements to just throw in. I've seen people say that that's a resolution they would have liked to see, but again, it's not something we need. We have all the pieces there, and combine that with the question mark box, which is quite sweet. That's our resolution. He now has a completely different future ahead of him, and that's all we need.
And that's basically it. We then get a song and a montage of Lewis doing his inventing, and then we get a big quote from Walt Disney, which includes the words "keep moving forward," which they went, we're going to crowbar that phrase into this film as heavy-handedly as possible, and then the end go, but it's something Walt Disney said, so it presumably has some sort of meaning. I mean, I can't really think of a more fitting phrase to use at the end of this period of films than "keep moving forward." You're not that far away from Tangled.
It's all right that you're failing over and over and over.
On a side note, this film had a budget of $150 million and it tanked.
I'm assuming that most of that money went to Steven Anderson. I wrote it, I directed it, and I gave the best performance. Steven, we need some of that money for animation. No, you don't.
Look, you can have a bit of it to get Adam West and Tom Selleck in, but that's it.
They'll only do an afternoon worth of voice recording, though.
And that's the plot of Meet the Robinsons. But before Liam and I pass our final judgment on it and decide whether it's worthy of going on our list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics, Liam, is there anything else we need to talk about regarding this film?
You know, this is such an oddity from Disney that when watching this, I completely forgot that we had to do this. But we need to decide which character we think is the sexiest character in Meet the Robinsons. As always, we're referring to characters that we feel are unnecessarily sexualized for a family animation film. And I don't think there's many candidates in this film. Everyone's a bit weird. It's certainly not Bowler Hat Guy. He's a creep. Lovable, but a creep.
Yeah, there's no one particularly aesthetically pleasing. The best I had was the gym teacher, because he's just stacked.
The gym teacher is so weird to me. It feels like they've got an impressionist to fill a Patrick Warburton-shaped hole.
Yep.
It's clearly what they're going for. And I don't know, did that relationship just peter out by this point? Because that's clearly what it is. And how hard would it have been to get Patrick Warburton for 5 lines?
Liam, we've established the money went to Steven Anderson and a little bit to Adam West and Tom Selleck. There was just no money left.
Yeah, I was considering that the sexiest character might be Fran, or Franny rather, the mum, who is just a woman. And I felt very strange being like, well, here's just a normal woman. That's the sexiest character in this film.
What about Jamie Cullum Frog? He wears a suit.
I think he's got a very sexy voice, but it's also attached to a frog. So yeah, I'm going to go with the gym teacher as well.
Excellent. Another sexiest character entry that wins by default.
With sexiest character decided then, all we need to decide is whether or not we think this film deserves a spot on the list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics. Before we can decide though, we first have to retrieve the scroll of Waly Gisnep's animated classics. Unfortunately, I can't quite remember where the vault is, so let me just get our very handy newly invented memory scanner, pop it on my head, watch all of Mulan with Mulan's sexy horse, and oh yeah, the vault's just around the corner.
To be fair, I couldn't remember because we've not visited it for quite a while. We've had some bad films recently.
We show up and it's just covered in dust. and grime, and there's a strange man in a child's baseball uniform standing inside it. And with that, I have the scroll of Waly Gisnep's animated classics. Quill at the ready, I ask, Ben, should Meet the Robinsons be added to the list?
This is a weird time for Disney, and this is arguably the weirdest film. There's a case to say Chicken Little. They're both very, very odd films. They don't feel like Disney films in any way. They certainly don't look like Disney films. And this is the last time Disney was making a CGI film before they properly sort of integrated Pixar into their hall, so to speak. So this film does not look good, and it has not aged well visually. I don't like a lot of this film. I think problematically, for the emotional beats of this film to work, I have to like the Robinsons, and I find them intolerable, which is a problem. I don't really care about most of the characters in this film, which obviously hold it all back. Bowler Hat Guy, I'm not going to say he's my favourite villain, but he's a very underrated villain. I think he's genuinely very entertaining, and he carries a lot of this film. He's rightly given a lot of screen time in this film, but that's not enough to swing it for me. So for me, it's a no. That said, this is the kind of film I can really see people loving and seeing as a bit of a dark horse in the Disney canon. It's definitely not for me, but compared to films like Dinosaur, Home on the Range, Chicken Little, where I just don't think there's anything going for them, this is the sort of film where I go, I don't think this film's very good. I think it has a lot of faults, but I could see why someone may really, really love this film. In the same way I love Robin Hood, despite the fact it clearly has flaws. I just love it intrinsically.
Really, is Meet the Robinsons a good film? No. I don't think there are many metrics by which I could say this is a good film. Did I enjoy this film? I did. I really enjoyed this the first time I watched it because it just caught me by surprise. And I was really worried coming back to this film thinking, okay, the surprise is gone. Will I still find this film entertaining? And weirdly enough, the answer was yes. Again, a lot of that was that I was laughing at the state of the film. There are some things that just don't make any sense and are weird, and that makes it entertaining. I don't think I can put this on the list because I do not think it is a good film, but this is a film that I am excited to show people. As I say, this pretty much went under the radar for a lot of people, and unless you're either, a hardcore Disney fan wanting to watch them all, or maybe you were very young when this came out, so let's say you were born in around the year 2000, then I can see people having seen it. But other than that, a lot of people have not seen this film, and I am always excited at the prospect of getting to show someone this strange artifact from this second dark age of Disney. And as you say, a large part of that is Bowler Hat Guy. You're right, he's not my favourite Disney villain. He's definitely one of the most underrated. Ratigan is often considered like the most underrated Disney villain because he's part of an underrated film, and the film works and the villain is perfect for the film. I would argue Bowler Hat Guy is more underrated because he does not have his cult following, and I think a large part of that is because the film he is in is so structurally weak. So yeah, I don't think it can make the list, but if you've not seen this film, I definitely think it's worth watching, and it's certainly one I'm going to enjoy pulling out to show someone for the first time.
It's kind of strange that for a film that has a lot of time travel in, the time travel is quite solid, and it's the rest of the film that has structural issues. So, Meet the Robinsons does not make the cut, but of course, these are just the opinions of Liam and myself. Do you feel that Meet the Robinsons is an underrated gem? Does it have emotional resonance for you? Do you feel Bowler Hat Guy is not only an underrated villain, but actually is a missing gem hidden in the Disney archives? Or maybe this is the last of the weird films we got in the experimental noughties. As always, we're very keen to hear what your thoughts are on Meet the Robinsons, and of course who you think the sexiest character in this film. And of course there always are more films for us to talk about. Speaking of which, Liam, what are we looking at next time?
Well, Ben, I wouldn't say we're quite out of the weird experimental era of Disney. We've still got one more film to go before we reach Disney's return to the 2D animated fairy tale with The Princess and the Frog, and that film is 2008's Bolt, a strange little entry about a superhero dog, once again set in the modern era and continuing that just really bizarre creativity that Disney were exhibiting at this time. With that, all that's left to say is thank you very much for listening wherever you choose to do so. Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics is available to listen to on Spotify and SoundCloud, as well as an enhanced version available on YouTube, alongside various edits and other Disney-related content we put up on the channel. So remember to watch Bolt and join us next time for Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics.